So many paintings that involve so many different shades of green has become kind of a sort of a sideline. And green was never my favorite color, really. The ballparks were painted green in those days. The grass is a different kind of green, and every park had a slightly different kind of grass. It becomes a repetition with variations. What I found out was I was painting a lot of dirt and grass in this series, more than I had ever anticipated. Dealing with blades of grass and patterns that grass make, it's been kind of a difficult exercise, but fascinating. If I were a spectator, I'd be fascinated by it. Doing it's another matter. It's a little painful at times. I felt that there was a period in baseball history that had never been quite identified as such, as a 15-year slice of time, which began immediately after World War II, 1946, and continued for 15 years up to and including the 1960 season. And those were the last 15 years of baseball when it had 8 teams in each league and a 154-game schedule. Choosing this particular time frame, first of all, it was the period I grew up with. It had the biggest emotional impact on me. And when I say different names like Joe DiMaggio, Stan Musial, Robin Roberts, Willie Mays, Jackie Robinson, it still triggers an electric response throughout my entire psyche and memory. So those guys really were more important to me, and for good reason. My wife Pat had bought me a baseball encyclopedia, and I'm looking through this encyclopedia, and it had broken down all the stats from every year, and I'm looking through all the years from when I was a kid, and I thought, God, the only thing this needs is pictures. And of course, the idea of doing the pictures, though, was kind of staggering. I thought, well, I guess I could do that. And ignorance is truly bliss, because if I had known how much work it would be, I would have never started it. But I started it, and once I started it, I couldn't stop. Determining this project, I decided to look at the baseball players of the period that I describe, and in my own mind and memory, I just started naming names, and I then augmented my memory with the baseball encyclopedia, and through a careful study of my memory bank and the book, I decided basically who the top 400 players were in that period. And I decided, well, that's a nice figure. I'll do 400 portraits to start with, and it's sort of grown from there, as if that weren't enough. The portraits themselves were, I had to decide, well, what's the size, what's the format to start this undertaking. So I figured that a 10 by 8 inch face was about the right size. So I went into Flax's and ordered 400 10 by 8 canvases, and the guy looked at me as though I were nuts, and that didn't make me feel any better about starting this thing, but that's how it got started. I took a trip up to Cooperstown to the hallowed halls of the Hall of Fame and went into their library with a shopping list, and that's where all the photo research has taken place. So I'm working from thousands of different sources, different lighting conditions, different photographers, different croppings, and so I had to make this project look as though it were all done at the same time by the same person. So I decided a tight cropping on the faces, color field backgrounds, no illustration in the backgrounds of the portrait, so it could be a modular 400-piece work of art. However big it got, that's how big that 400-part painting was going to be. Then I decided, well, that's interesting, all 400 faces of the top players and managers, but what about body portraits, posed action portraits? Well, I couldn't do all 400. I wanted to get this done in my own lifetime. So I thought, well, how about the top 125 guys will actually get a posed action piece? And then, of course, there were the great moments and the great players in action, game action. So that was about another 65 or 70 piece of the work. And those are a little bit bigger paintings, about 30 by 40 inches on average. But all of this had to be researched and edited down in terms of photographic source material. Then we edited it down even further to the great moments and the greatest of the players, including great moments and maybe not so great moments. One in 1951 was a moment in St. Louis, Missouri at Sportsman's Park when a guy named Eddie Goodell came to bat as a pinch hitter in the second game of a doubleheader between the St. Louis Browns, owned by Bill Veeck, against the Detroit Tigers. Eddie Goodell happened to be 3 feet 6 inches tall, and he was about 25 years old at the time, which made him a midget. Eddie comes up to the plate carrying a toy bat about this big, and the home plate umpire looks at this little guy in a little miniature St. Louis Browns uniform and says, "What gives here?" And Eddie, at that moment, under instructions of Veeck, pulls out his contract from his back pocket and says, "I'm a member of the St. Louis Browns. I'm here to bat." And there he goes. The umpire had no recourse but to allow him to bat. Of course, all 4 pitches were high, and Eddie walked to first base, where he immediately replaced by a pinch runner. It would have been fun to see Eddie try to get to second base and try to break up a double play by going hard into the shortstop or second baseman, but we never had that pleasure. In fact, the commissioner of baseball revoked Eddie's license the next day, or contract, and said no more midgets in baseball, so there is a size discrimination there. But that was the story of Eddie Goodell. 10 years later, he was murdered in Chicago. Now, I wanted to do a painting of Eddie Goodell's big moment, and there's a well-known photograph, which is part of public domain now. It's been used so often, but it's always been this blurry black and white image, which I translated into a sharp focus, full color image, and I think it was 30 by 40 inches, almost life-size, of Eddie at bat. The painting went up to the gallery and was shown along with the painting of Joe DiMaggio, a slightly better ball player. But the interesting point of this is that one person bought both Joe DiMaggio in 1941 and Eddie Goodell in 1951 on the same day, a guy named Jerry Moss, who had been with A&M Records. So he showed to me he was a real baseball aficionado by going with the sublime and the ridiculous all in one day. The thing I have still to finish are the ballpark paintings. I've got maybe about 20 panoramas, which are, I would say, 6.5 feet wide, average, as well as 23 aerial views, which all measure the same 36 by 54 inches. So together, the whole project ends up being 650 images, which in a straight line, if we were to put every canvas side by side, including the small ones, it would stretch a fifth of a mile. First thing I thought about was doing aerial views of the ballparks, and I started those with charcoal drawings just to get kind of a feel for how it might look in terms of a painting. But somewhere in between doing all the charcoal drawings, I decided I wanted to do a wide-angle sort of panoramic view of some of the ballparks. So I wanted to start with an older ballpark, so I went to Boston's Fenway Park, photographed it, and took a series of photographs over a 4-day period, which really became the genesis of all my raw footage for doing a big ballpark panorama. I think the very first one I did, though, was of the Polo Grounds in New York, and that was 11 feet wide. It was all one canvas, and it was about 2.5 feet tall. And that one I based on old black and white photographs and pieced together about 3 photographs to help form this panoramic view of the Polo Grounds. After doing the first panel, 11 feet wide, I found out that I was barely able to get it out of the building, and my ego at that point was getting to a point where I thought, well, big is good. Bigger might be better. So in order to accommodate getting paintings in and out of the building of considerably larger size, like 15, 16, 18 feet wide, I decided breaking it down on 3 panels, which would then be, visually connected or literally connected after the paintings were done. So that was the only way in the current situation, that I could do these large paintings. Even with that, there were a couple paintings, one in particular, which was 6 by 9 feet of an aerial view of Yankee Stadium. Got stuck. Pat and I were trying to take it down the stairs and got stuck in the staircase, and that was one of life's more traumatic moments. So I learned my lesson: break it down into 3 panels rather than getting stuck in the stairway forever. So that got me started on that whole genre of ballpark paintings. Now, that painting was sold at Gallery Hennick, where I show in New York City. It was one of the first paintings I sold with the gallery, and it went for a nice figure, 11 grand. And I thought, well, hey, I like this stuff, and if I like it, maybe somebody else likes it enough to buy it for, that much money. Not to be crass and commercial about it, but living in New York City, one has to be aware of the fact that the meter's always ticking. And if you're going to do anything, you have to make some money. So there's no point in saying, I'm in an ivory tower, and money doesn't mean anything, because it does. And it also validates the fact that, you're not the only one interested in it, and gives you a little bit of a boost in more ways than one.
I cannot believe that Andy gets up every day and goes into this studio knowing how many paintings have to be done, how many paintings have yet to be completed. It's just amazing for me to see him go through this series, because at one time there was nothing but 400 blank canvases that were each 10 inches by 8 inches square. And Andy said, look, they've all been stretched. Now all I have to do is paint them. Well, I've been representing Andy since about 1982. At the time, he was doing paintings of famous celebrities. And I guess he started doing baseball subject matter in the late 80s. The current project was something that Andy thought would take him 3 years to do. And of course, it's already turned out to over 4 years, and many of these paintings that are in the exhibition are still in progress. Andy has not only done panoramas of these stadiums as they existed back in those days, but he's also done some aerial views. So we have this project which is, the players are almost finished, but some of the stadiums are still just in Andy's head. There's really nobody that I know of that has more of a knowledge of the game of baseball past time as Andy Jurinko. He astonishes me every day by giving me the stats on players that are in his series. He grew up in the same period that I did, and these players, of course, I know of, and I know which years they played, but I most certainly did not know how many home runs and runs batted in and hits they had in their lifetime. Many times clients come in and say, this is incorrect, this player did not bat previous to the player that's on the scoreboard. And once they've spoken to Andy about this matter, they're pretty well convinced that they were wrong and that he was right.
These kinds of projects, I've never started before, so I never really knew how long it was going to take, nor did I want to know. And in fact, I've worked on it in such a way, I've tried to work on all things simultaneously. In other words, I started all 400 portraits at the same time, drew them all in black and white paint to begin with. Usually I would work on one team at a time, because I'd get into the psyche of that team, the uniform, the hat, the colors, the teammates. There was a camaraderie there that translated better if I worked on them simultaneously. That was the only way I could do this and keep a handle on the whole thing. In other words, I had to feel like I was controlling this rather than it controlling me. Most of the time I feel like it's controlling me, however. My poor wife Patricia, who actually hates baseball, but has been a champion of this cause nonetheless.
I don't really hate baseball. I just have no interest in baseball. It doesn't interest me. I don't understand. I shouldn't say I do understand it. After 20 years, I actually understand it. He's pounded it into my head. But I have no. It's boring to me. There isn't anything about it that I care about. I don't care about the players. There have been many times that he has made me go with him to a baseball game. And I've sat there, I've taken my knitting with me, and I've sat there and I've looked at the game, and he's all excited and he's jumping up, and I just don't care. I'm ready to hit the snooze button. I don't care. Give me a beer, give me some hot dogs, right? Give me something to eat, and that's fine.
We've given up a lot, I mean, it's a big sacrifice. And during the baseball strike and a few other greedy, self-destructive moments that baseball has gone through in the past few years, I've really questioned why I even started dealing with this subject, because it turned me off. But then I'd realize who I was painting, and Robin Roberts and Stan Musial, Joe DiMaggio, Willie Mays were still the same lovable guys.
Even though I don't like baseball, I do love Andrew's paintings. You feel like you can walk into them, especially when he does the huge baseball stadiums. I've often said to him, we should build some sort of environment, and you have the stadium, and you kind of shape it in 3 dimensions, and you can walk into it, and there should be baseball sounds in the background, and we put some dirt on the ground and put one of those fences around it. I admire his painting, whether it's baseball or whether it's whatever it is, whatever he's doing. I think he's an excellent artist, but the subject matter really doesn't take away from the fact that I love what he does. Andrew and I have a lot of interests in common, which is another reason why our relationship and our marriage works. We have a season subscription to the Philharmonic, which we enjoy doing. We go to museums, we go out to eat, we go shopping, which actually is a passion of mine. I drag him along with me. We have a movie class, a movie preview class that we belong to, which I never thought he'd love doing this. Someone told me about it. It's 9 o'clock in the morning on Saturday morning. So I decided I'd buy him a guest pass, and he could go for 5 times, and he went. He fell in love with it. So now we've been doing that for about 4 years. It's great. It's our date day. We go to the movies on Saturday morning, and then we go shopping, we kind of eat lunch and do brunch, and it's great. About 4 years ago, I decided to go to FIT, which is the Fashion Institute of Technology, and take a jewelry design class. And the class that I registered for, they decided to cancel. And instead of saying, oh, well, what the heck, I'm not going to do it, I decided that I would take what they considered a shop class in jewelry design. I walked in, and I was in love. They had all kinds of power equipment in there, all kinds of tools and drills and saws and buffers and polishers and ring stretchers. I loved it. And the class was totally overcrowded. But unfortunately, a lot of women are intimidated by equipment, and I'm not. So about the 3rd week, we were down to about 5 people in the class, and I got real personal attention, which was fabulous. I realized that I just love this. I was in heaven. This is what I was meant to do. As a matter of fact, over the years, I've tried to figure out what I could make for Andrew, because he really doesn't wear much jewelry. And we recently took a vacation to Belize, and unfortunately, he lost his wedding ring while we were swimming. So I was able to now make him something. I'm making him a wedding band, which hopefully he'll get sometime before our anniversary, which is in November. So we'll see.
The location I work in is also rather interesting. 19 years ago, Pat and I moved into this old office building, which was vacant at the time, and it's a 13-story building, 125 years old now. And we designed and constructed the space that we're now in, and it's worked out pretty well. We had to put a lot of cash and effort into it, but it was a good choice.
When we first moved into this place, we thought it was just gigantic. We didn't have any walls, and we hadn't broken it up into its designated areas. Now it's still big compared to other friends who live in Manhattan. I mean, we have friends who live in the size of our closet, but it gets smaller and smaller every year as we both accumulate more stuff. I have a studio and I have 11 knitting machines and I make jewelry in there. I have mannequins. I have all kinds of art equipment. Andrew, of course, has his studio with 600 paintings. It gets a little crowded, but as I said, we're lucky. Compared to other people we know, this is absolutely a paradise. It's grand.
Working in this neighborhood right next to the World Trade Center, which is 110 stories tall or something like that, it also puts everything in perspective. The city tends to make you feel like a small drop in the ocean, and living next door to the World Trade Center is the first thing I see in the morning. It does tend to do that. Living next door to the World Trade Center to some degree is a little bit like living in a fishbowl. They look at me, I look at them. You know, secretaries look over here, I look back. We've had people buzz on our door asking what the hell is going on here. They're so curious. They were taking bets as to what I was doing over there. They could see me moving back and forth. I stand when I work, so I'm always moving back and forth all day long, working on the paintings, and they could see me moving around in sort of an odd way, I suppose, to them, so they were most curious. In terms of when I can actually work, I like to start leisurely. I work very long, very steady hours, but at a pace that I feel is kind of lazy in a funny way. I usually start, I don't know, 11 o'clock in the morning, work through till maybe 6:30, take a break, and then go back in and work some more at night when there's less confusion. Living here right next door to the World Trade Center, a lot of psychic energy out on those streets, and mental static, and it drifts in the windows. Even when I try to block it out, it's there. At night, it's easier to think. You get into a different zone. I think working in the studio, you get into a different mental state of awareness, the act of concentrating on exact drawing and color and shape and form. It does become an altered state of awareness, but it takes a few hours to get into that. And during the day, it's interrupted by phone calls from, the usual crowd, the usual suspects. And it's my fault, too, because I'm distracted too easily sometimes during the day. My wife, Pat, bought me a headset, very thoughtful of her, which allowed me to paint and talk at the same time. I've actually become pretty good at it. And actually talking and painting at the same time isn't such a bad idea, because you're actually painting more on a subconscious level then, and it allows you to do things a little bit more easily than if you just concentrate too hard sometimes. You can just get a little too uptight.
When I first met Andrew, he was still doing paintings of movie stars, but he was also doing paintings of people in crowd situations. People at Coney Island, people standing on street corners, people waiting in line to get something, people sunbathing. One of my clients actually commissioned to do the sex symbol painting where she was laying across this leather couch. So he did all kinds of paintings of people, and upholstery and sand and textures, and it was wonderful. They were great.
Actually, I was born 2 months before Hitler invaded Poland, so that was part of my psyche as well. My first drawings as a kid were not of mommy and daddy and the dog. They were of Germans, Japanese, Americans, both theaters of war, tanks, airplanes, blitzkriegs, barbed wire, explosions, grunts, with their rifles. And for some reason, I had an accurate way of depicting this stuff. I guess I must have seen some maybe early footage and newsreels in the movies. I used to go to movies with my parents when I was a little kid, so I had that. That was also an undercurrent of my beginnings. Those two things maybe colored or influenced my life more than anything, culturally speaking, were World War II and baseball. The earliest baseball drawings that I did were probably based on photographic imagery that I would garner from the newspaper. My favorite player was Del Ennis of the Phillies, and I remember doing a couple of paintings of Del and a guy named Al Rosen from the Indians. Unfortunately, in terms of images from that period, I really don't have many. I lost it all in a fire, which is kind of tough. This is some early stuff that I've Salvaged. All I've got left of the early work, so to speak. Rocky Marciano, the champ. James Dean, 1956. Elvis, another gouache on paper mounted on cardboard, 1957. And here we have my favorite, Kim Novak, posing on Fifth Avenue in New York City in the early morning hours. God, what a movie star she was. Here's my favorite ball player, Del Ennis, Philadelphia's own slugging outfielder, probably 1957 piece. Del was an RBI king in the National League for about 10 years with the Phillies, and this is probably the beginning of my baseball art career.
Oh, sure. I've seen Andrew play dice baseball a lot. According to his mythology, Andrew invented this dice baseball game when he was, 11 or 12 years old, and he and his brother used to play it all of the time. And they had recreated whatever stadiums existed at that time. Unfortunately, I don't know what happened. Either they were burnt up in a fire or he lost them somewhere along the way. For all I know, his mother threw them away, he has all kinds of stories about things that he cherished that his mother got rid of. But anyway, about 12 years ago, our next door neighbor, who is also a baseball fan and a painter, the two of them decided that they would recreate all of the existing baseball stadiums in two-dimensional scale and have all of the signage that was involved with each stadium. So the two of them sat at our kitchen table for an entire summer, recreating all of the baseball stadiums. And after they did that, after they painted in all the little logos and every little stadium and all the little lines that told you how far things went, the infield and whatever, they then decided that they would take two different leagues, and they would play an entire season. Well, by the time they had played 2 weeks of games, they realized it would take them the rest of their lives to play all the games, so they quickly gave it up. But it was just funny. It was funny looking at the two of them like these two little 12-year-old boys sitting at the kitchen table, painting in little logos for different companies and different fields. It was a very funny experience. According to Andrew, if you throw 3 dice, you can come up with fairly accurate numbers on what's going to happen in a real game. I personally don't understand it, and my mind doesn't work that way. I mean, Andrew's got this mind that works. He's interested in weather, he's interested in time, he's interested in anything that has to do with numbers.
Okay, well, we're ready to play a game, and the important thing to remember here is that middle-of-the-road numbers will produce middle-of-the-road results. High numbers will produce unusual results, and it is a bit like the I Ching in as much as the numbers will dictate probabilities of unusual or rare occurrences or average, commonplace occurrences. So I think we can get ready to start this game. Both teams have concluded their batting practice. The national anthem has been played by Gladys Gooding, and we're ready to start Game 1, the New York Yankees at Ebbets Field and the Brooklyn Dodgers, 1956. And leading off for the Yankees against Carl Erskine is Hank Bauer. Oh, there's a walk. Hank's on first base. Billy Martin's up. Are they going to try a sacrifice here? We don't know. No, Billy is swinging away and pops up. Uh-oh, 1 out. Here comes Mickey Mantle. Let's see what Mickey does. Mickey pops up, 2 gone. It's up to Yogi Berra. Base hit. And taking third on the play is Hank Bauer. So we've got men at first and third, 2 outs. Joe Collins, first baseman, is up. Oh, he struck him out. A strikeout. So Carl Erskine and the Dodgers escape a threat in first by the Yanks. No score after 1/2 inning. Here come the Dodgers. Junior Gilliam. Oh, against Whitey Ford, he strikes out. Whitey looks sharp after 1 batter. Pee Wee Reese. Well, there's a base hit. Pee Wee Reese singles to left. Duke Snyder with one out, one on. Oh, struck him out. Roy Campanella. Ground ball, the inning is over. After one, it's no score. One of the problems of trying to be an artist in New York City is doing the work is one thing, that's difficult enough, but then you're faced with the problem of, well, does anyone want to show this stuff? I was fortunate to find a good gallery to show the work in, but again, that happens only on occasion. When you have a solo exhibition, usually is once every 3 or 4 years. Sometimes there's group shows, but exposure is always a problem. I was lucky enough to, in 1987, 88, a restaurant known as Mickey Mantle's was opened up by John Lowy and Bill Lederman. And this place is just off Central Park South. And with a name like Mickey Mantle's, you would assume that some of the imagery on the wall would be related to baseball.
Myself and my partner, John Lowy, decided to open up a sports bar somewhere in Manhattan. And we were looking at different locations, and the broker showed us a location here on Central Park South. And we were standing in front of the restaurant space and thinking about, wouldn't this make a great Mickey Mantle's? So we went out, we tracked Mickey down, and 3 or 4 weeks later, we're sitting at a dinner table with Mickey, telling him about our idea for a restaurant.
My partner, Bill Lederman, and I first came up with the idea of doing a sports bar back in 1986. And we knew somebody who, just a generic sports bar, and we knew someone who had worked with Mickey Mantle and knew him. And we asked him if he could make an introduction, and he did. And we ended up having a meeting in early 1987 with Mickey. And originally our idea, and the idea that we pitched him the first night that we met him, was for a very different kind of place. It would be more of a fun sports emporium, batting cages, hoop shoots, pitching machines, things of that nature, less emphasis on the food. And we spent about 10 minutes telling our ideas to Mickey, and he just listened. And at the end of it, he looked at us and he said, "I don't want none of that crap." And we just immediately realized we had to reconceptualize. What he said was, "I want a place where people my age can feel comfortable, a place like Toots Shor's used to be." And we went back to the drawing board, and we came up with an idea for a sports-themed restaurant geared toward an older crowd, something that really didn't exist in New York at that time. And that's really, I think, what we pioneered with Mickey Mantle's restaurant.
Well, the artwork here is the ambiance. I mean, we have a very specific philosophy here that we want people to come in and view memorabilia and original artwork. And that's our philosophy here. And we promoted over the years our sports art gallery. And we have constantly changing artists coming and going here. Andy's been one of the few people who've been with us from the very beginning. Other ones have come and they've gone. And we feel that the artwork is the restaurant, more so than anything else in terms of the decor. We ended up with a restaurant with the type of things we have in here now, which is original artwork and oil paintings and pictures. Over the years, we've had over 50 different artists exhibiting their stuff here.
We wanted to have an art gallery that was devoted exclusively to sports. And I believe that to this date, we still are New York's only all-sports art gallery. We wanted a diverse selection of artists and media. And we also wanted to capture a sense of sports and baseball in particular in the golden age, the 50s and the 60s, which is the era that Mickey played in. Mickey used to come into the restaurant and he'd see Andy's paintings, particularly the ones of situations that he was in, game situations, and he would remember those games. It's amazing. He loved it. He would look at the painting, he would stand there, look at it, and then start telling us stories about what happened that day, what happened that year. He would just go on and on and on. It really jogged his memory, and he loved it.
Mickey loved Andy's work, and Mickey liked Andy because Andy's a regular guy. I mean, he's to me one of the top 3 sports artists in the country right now, and he's a top artist in the field that hasn't gotten a lot of respect. Outside of Leroy Neiman, people think of sports artists; they're all lumped in the same category.
People love Andy Jurinko's artwork. It's little kids, old men, women, everybody. They're fascinated by it. They come up, they stare at it, they ask questions. They talk about the situations. It makes them remember things from their past. Everybody loves his work, and I think everyone would love to go home with an Andy Jurinko, and not everyone can afford one.
One of the original pieces we had in the restaurant was the 500 home run club piece, where Andy had a headshot of every member of that particular club. This is before Eddie Murray made it in this year. People were always guessing who they were, who's that one, because the pictures are not title. So Mel Ott and Babe Ruth and so on and so forth. So one day, one of the customers pulls over the waitress and says, "Who's that guy over there in the picture with the W on his cap?" And she goes, "That's Herman Killebrew." And he goes, "No, wait a minute." He says, "I'm Harmon Killebrew, and that's me, and I'm on the picture there." And it was just one of those amusing moments where everybody got a laugh out of it.
And I was one of the people that first showed at Mantles, and my work tended to be liked by the owners, and they liked me, I liked them, and it was a place to show work in a public space and get exposure. Now that's all fine. It's a chance to sell it, but it's also not a gallery or museum setting. I mean, it is, sometimes it's just a bar room, and people in a restaurant or a bar, or a combination of the two, sometimes do become a little bit careless as to what they're doing, and maybe they get drunk, and maybe they swing around with a fork or a knife, and it happens to go through a painting, and these things happen. Now, there was a very interesting or amusing moment when I was invited to a private party at Mantles. It was for a company, and at that time, I think the biggest painting I had at Mantles was a 14-part painting, and it was 14 very large portraits of the 500 home run club. These are the 14 guys who have hit 500 or more homers. At any rate, all 14 panels are in 2 rows of 7 on the biggest wall in the main dining room. Well, I walked in there. There was a belly dancer performing there that night. She had her back to the wall. As she was gyrating, she was touching all 14 portraits, and they were in severe danger of being dislodged from their moorings. And at any rate, it looked as though an earthquake had hit. There wasn't one level painting by the time she was done dancing, but I was not about to walk up to her in the middle of her dance and, persuade her to stop doing it. After she was done, of course, we straightened them out. But that's the kind of exposure that you don't always expect or get. Another time, had a big 14-foot wide painting of old Yankee Stadium at the restaurant. Mickey Mantle was at that in the painting. Some clown decided he wanted to attack Mickey Mantle that night with a butter knife.
One time a patron came in, and I don't know if he just hated the Yankees or what, but he just went at one of Andy's paintings of Yankee Stadium with a butter knife. Just took a butter knife and ripped right into it. And disappeared. Don't know whatever happened to that man.
Selling a painting sometimes is like standing in a field waiting for lightning to strike you on top of the head. You never know when or if it's going to happen, and if you're going to be a serious full-time painter, it preys on your mind. How do you make a living? So an opportunity presented itself. I met a publisher from New York named Bill Goff, who was just getting into publishing sports imagery. Having had a gallery on 57th Street, he was experiencing the same problems. You sell a painting here or there, but boy, the overhead eats it up. So we discussed the possibility of doing limited edition offset lithos. The first stadium that we published of mine was a big 15-foot wide painting. The original painting was 15 feet wide of Fenway Park. I think Wade Boggs was at bat against the Oakland Athletics that particular moment. I think the prints serve a purpose, and it helps keep me alive, but it also exposes a wider audience to what I'm doing. Having a show at a gallery is a very sporadic kind of thing, whereas the prints are always there, and there are images of paintings that are available for a lot less money, so the audience can be younger, the people who someday might want to buy a painting. It serves a purpose that way.
In 1976, I determined that there was a need, a little niche that could be developed for sports art. And I opened the world's first sports art gallery, which was on 57th Street in Manhattan in 1977, and I ran it through 1984. As a result of a lot of my experiences there, I determined that there would be a need and a possible marketing outlet for some limited edition prints in the sports area. And we started publishing prints, which became this business in 1987. It's ironic that Mickey Mantle's restaurant opened exactly 2 blocks north of my gallery shortly after my gallery closed, and he almost picked up the void by creating a sports art gallery in the restaurant, and it's been a very interesting place to watch the sports art movement develop. My company represents 7 different artists, each does a different kind of work and has a different specialty. We publish about 18 prints a year. Every year we do a calendar using a lot of the works that have been published previously as prints. When I first met Andy, it was as a result of having seen the chrome of the Fenway Park triptych. And I was very skeptical about publishing this print for 2 reasons. One is a triptych is a 3-panel painting, and it had 2 vertical seams in the painting, and I didn't know how that would play in the print market. And secondly, it was a very elongated horizontal piece. It almost looked like a gun turret sight. And I was very resistant to publishing the piece, but I figured, what the heck, let's give it a shot. And it worked out that the thing was met with enormous demand. And I met Andy personally through the experience of publishing that print, and there was an enormous amount of enthusiasm because we were really starting something very new that had never been done before, and it worked out very well for both of us. Andy Jurinko is a very special artist to this business. When I met him, it was a very fortunate thing for both of us. It's almost as though when Ford and Daimler were developing the car independently continents away, Andy and I were both working independently on the concept of ballpark art. I was publishing the prints, he was creating the paintings, and when we met, it was a natural kind of marriage. We've published over 30 of Andy's prints to date. Many of them have graced the cover of our calendars, which we've been publishing since 1991. And it's always a pleasure to see whatever Andy's new work is, because I know that we're going to enjoy a kind of success together that's really unachievable elsewhere. A wonderful thing happens when we publish an Andy Jurinko print. We start with a painting. And if you hang a painting in an art gallery, I know from my art gallery experience, maybe 200 people through the course of an exhibition will see that painting. But when you publish a print and market it through direct marketing, we have a mailing list now, a database of about 30,000 people. And we reproduce everything in color and send all of the mailings to everyone on our list. So all of a sudden, the universe expands extraordinarily. We do all the prints in limited editions of 600, so the opportunity for a number of people to own a particular image now evolves rather than just a single person owning a single painting. It's almost part of the modern age where the world is getting smaller and more people have more opportunities. These prints are collected by virtually everyone in a cross-section of society. First of all, a lot of people in baseball, in organized baseball, collect them. Everyone from team owners to general managers to field managers to players own them, and training people, equipment people, but also doctors and lawyers and business executives. One of my favorite things happened the same day I sold the same print. In fact, it was one of Andy's Ebbets Field. I sold it to a senior vice president at Mobil, and I sold one of the same print the same day to Joe of Joe's Friendly Mobile Station. So you can see it just transcends all kinds of demographics. The prints that we publish are photomechanical offset reproductions. Today we're signing 2 editions. One is Crosley Field Matinee and the other is Wrigley Field Panorama. Both of them are part of Andy's project, the game we left behind, 1946 to 1960. I think some of the best panoramas I've seen of each of these 2 stadiums. Whenever we publish an edition, we have a signing day. And the artist will come up to our offices here in Kent, Connecticut, and he'll sign the prints, and I'll number the prints. And it's almost a ritual where we get to spend some time together and go over a lot of interesting things and also get the job done. And it's also a very exciting time because we know the print's about to be marketed within the next few days. For each edition, to sign and number each edition, it takes approximately 3 to 3.5 hours. Today we're signing 2 editions, and that'll take us 6 to 7 hours. That's a pretty good day. With Beeston and The project, the game we left behind, 46 to 60, I think is something that Andy should donate his brain to science. I think they're going to want to look inside and try to determine whatever prompted him to undertake such an enormous project. I think when it comes to fruition, when it's completed, when the book's published, when all the prints are published, when the calendars and all the ancillary marketing's done, it's going to be an extraordinary thing, and he will be recognized as a magic person in this industry.
Yeah, the first step in making a print or a book is to photograph the work, and I have the photographers come to the studio, which makes it the whole process much easier rather than transporting it to some photo studio every time I needed to photograph 10 paintings, for instance. Like a maniac, right?
Like this. Okay, we're ready.
Ed Peterson Sr. and his son Ed are both baseball fans.
I got it. 22.
Ed Peterson Sr. has been a fine art photographer for many years and working with some really big names, both galleries and artists. And he also knows quite a bit about baseball, and he's become a fan of the project and my work, and so it's much more simpatico than just dropping off the work at some anonymous studio where you don't know really who's shooting the work or how they feel about it, so it becomes much more familiar. Where do I put all this stuff when I'm done with it? Fortunately, I've been able to sell quite a bit of it, but there obviously, if you look around here, you can see a few paintings stacked up. So I'm living in the midst of it, and storage is a problem. And that may have to be a separate expenditure at some point, but hopefully we will sell a few more pieces. This happens to be Robin Roberts, one of my favorite players from Philadelphia back in the 50s. Again, he's 1/400th of the portrait portion of the book. I think the total number of paintings is 600, and these happen to be the smallest elements, but they're a lot of fun trying to get the personality and likeness of each guy as faithfully as possible. And I've tried to keep my own personality out of the portraitures to some degree. Maybe some people would think too much so, but I didn't want to give caricature renditions of each guy, but I had to, try to make it somewhat lifelike and realistic. And they're all from black and white photographs, so I'm after looking through thousands of images of ball players, I chose the one black and white image that I thought best represented that guy's likeness and my personal favorite of each guy. So that was the editing process. And then you probably noticed that the heads are cropped in a similar fashion. That was because I chose to do it that way. Also, the backgrounds, there are none. They're just color field, which makes it more of a unified kind of look when you get a group of a whole team, the various shades of blue and green. And we were able to install 80 at a time in a rather elaborate grid work. Made installing the show possible. I think we'd still be there 6 months later trying to hang these things if we didn't have a system. In dealing with a show that included 500 pieces, it was hard to figure out how to do it without losing track of the opening date. We could have gone 2 weeks past the opening date and still were hanging pictures. And of course, then I had to identify each player for the gallery's list so that when people came in, they would have some way of knowing who they were looking at. So I spent a couple of hours up there with my writer friend, Chris Jennison, looking at each face and trying to remember who they were. It was kind of embarrassing if I didn't know who it was, but I think I managed to remember everybody.
I first met Andy Jurinko early in 1991, several months after I moved to New York from the Chicago area as a result of a merger and in the publishing business. And prior to that, I had gotten a solicitation from Bill Goff from one of Andy's pictures. I think it was the Ebbets Field matinee picture. And I was so struck by it that I was determined to meet him. And so certainly after I moved to New York, I called him and we got together. We made arrangements for me to come down. He said he had some pictures to show me, and I had no idea how many pictures he had to show me. But yes, I came down to the studio and looked at the pictures, and I also spoke with him quite inadvertently about the book project that he was envisioning at that point.
I began thinking about this project as long ago as 15 years ago. I actually designed a small book layout incorporating most of the types of paintings that I would do for this project. Of course, in talking about a book, one also thinks about writing, and I had to think about that too.
I began working on the book with Andy shortly after I met him. We talked about it, and he showed me a dummy that he'd put together, a small dummy of the various pictures and text. And I remembered thinking that it looked a lot like the yearbooks and magazines that I used to collect during the 50s when I was a teenager. And interestingly, he had the same vision for the book, a kind of period yearbook. So I think we resonated quite a lot with respect to the idea of the book. And he said he was looking for someone to write the text, the captions for the players and the profiles of the ballparks and the profiles of the teams. And I volunteered as unobtrusively as possible. I didn't want to impose myself on him, but I was very eager to do it. And he asked me to write a preface and a sample chapter, which is what I ask my authors to do. I'm in the publishing business, so I thought that was fair. And I did that, and he liked it well enough to take me on as his partner.
I was very fortunate to find a guy who's become a close friend, a guy named Christopher Jennison, who's an excellent writer and knows his stuff. And I think he's going to supply the words that accompany the pictures, little biographical sketches of all the players, all the ballparks, and the teams as a whole.
I didn't want this to be just another statistical run through. For instance, basically for most of the players, it's a 3 or 4 sentence caption. But instead of saying Willie Mays had 500-odd home runs during his magnificent career, I tried to find some anecdotes, particularly some quotes from books and magazines that I thought were emblematic and interesting, and try to flavor it that way. And certainly, when statistics are important, invoke them, but not have it not have the numbers predominate.
First time I met Andy, it was through a good friend of mine, Chris Jennison, who I worked on a book with over the last year or so. Chris had kept telling me about this mad artist who lived up in a garret somewhere and was drawing pictures of everyone who ever played Major League Baseball, mugshots. And I said, well, how many shots are involved here? And he said, oh, maybe 1,000 or so. And I said to Chris at the time, I said, well, I certainly love to see this guy and see how many heads he has, and find out from him how many years this has taken him to accomplish. I had previously seen some of Andy's work. I was familiar with his work, his wonderful pictures, some of which I had seen at Mickey Mantle's restaurant. And then when Chris dragged me down here, I think it was in the middle of the winter, Andy laid out a lot of these mugshots of these players that he had drawn. And as you know, none of the pictures have captions underneath. They're not identified. I've always had a rather useless memory. Namely, I can remember things that happened 50, 60 years ago, but I probably couldn't tell you what I had for breakfast this morning. And as he showed me these mugshots of these ball players, I was able to identify, I think, 9/10 of them. I got most of them. If you're a lifetime baseball fan, many of these pictures, these panoramic pictures that he draws, you can immediately identify who the batter is, who the catcher is, who the pitcher is. The thing that makes them so wonderful is the precision of these drawings. You can almost count the number of heads in each stadium. If there were supposedly 34,000 people at Ebbets Field on a particular afternoon, by God, he's got 34,000 heads in the picture. Also, there's something that I've always liked about these panoramic drawings, especially those that have to do with day baseball. I mean, if you come from my generation, baseball in the day is what it's all about. I love the cerulean sky And I love the fact that things seem to be so clear and precise, not only the skies, but the people in the drawings. I know Andy has done nighttime panoramas, but I have a strong predilection for the daytime drawings.
Andy Jurinko. Nice meeting you. How's the photo? A lot of times people come to an opening just because it's there, and they come for a lot of reasons. You know, drinking, exchanging name cards, that sort of thing. And they may just be coming out of a restaurant next door. Who knows? But you never know who's going to come to an opening, or for that matter, you never know who's going to come to the show while it's up for 4 weeks. The art world is kind of a funny business. It's the only entertainment field I know that doesn't charge admission. The other thing is, when you look at people looking at works in a gallery, they all look like potential buyers, but in reality, I think it's just a good act in order to stay a little bit longer and get that second, third, and maybe fourth glass of wine. Hi, Carolyn. Phone number, right? How you doing?
Andrew's opening in October was really impressive. I went to the gallery. I didn't have anything to do with the installation. I had not seen it. All I had done was help him pack the paintings up from the loft, and carry them downstairs and load them into the truck that then took them up to the gallery. I didn't know anything about what I was going to see when I arrived at the gallery. It was just spectacular. I thought it was fabulous. And when everyone arrived and he had a room full of people, I felt really good for him. It was like, okay, he's been home in the studio painting all of this time, but to see all of these people standing there looking at it with their mouths open, just the sheer scope of what he was doing, and they all finally realized what he was doing. I felt good for him. It was great.
For me personally, at an opening, or whenever I see my work at any opening, I always feel relieved. I also feel embarrassed to some degree. It's a little bit of, you know, being exposed to the world and having the nerve to put up your work and drag people out to see this work. And I always feel like it's both better than I thought it might look, and also it seems like less than it should, and I felt both those things. Things always happen a little bit unexpectedly, like baseball itself. You're never as good as you look when you're winning, and you're never as bad as you look when you're losing, and I think the same applies to any art form. In your own mind, you feel like you can always do better. One of the selfish reasons for an exhibition is for an artist to actually be able to see his work for the first time, especially when I'm, in this case, working on a group of 600 paintings. We showed about 500 at the Gallery Hennick opening. And it was instructive for me to see the work in a nice, clean space without all the clutter and the storage problems. The familiarity of my own studio with all the dirt and the paint and the dirty brushes, to see it in a space that really showed the work off to its best advantage. You know, the design of the gallery, the layout, the square footage, the ambiance of the neighborhood, all adds to enhance the whatever value there is to the work aesthetically. You know, I feel comfortable walking into that gallery and seeing the work. It always allows me to see it as though I hadn't done it, which is, in other words, it's a fresh way of looking at it. And of course, when other people see it, I get feedback, comments from other people. So it energizes the whole project all over again, even though I'm still working on it. A lot of the work up there, too, was interesting in as much as I showed many of the pieces as a work in progress. They were unfinished, in more simple terms. One whole wall of 20 by 16-inch posed action body portraits. I think 90% of them were unfinished, but we showed them as they were, and to the most people's eyes, they were finished. But I knew that once I got them back, there would be another several months in finishing up that portion of the project. So that was a little bit of a drawback in trying to sell work, because it just wasn't finished. It was difficult to mount and to exhibit because there were so many fragments. It was, I mean, 300 and some 8 by 10 paintings. I mean, that's a lot of pieces to deal with. And then there's 120 of the 20-inch paintings, and then a variety of other sizes, all bigger and odd shapes that made it a difficult task to present that much work and not make it look as though it were a yard sale or some cluttered, crazy conglomeration of unrelated sizes, shapes, and images. Fortunately, the gallery's space was large enough to accommodate a lot of it without being completely chaotic looking.
This is the largest show that we have ever hung as far as number of paintings. The show consists of over 500 paintings, mostly portraits of players who played between 1946 and 1960. There's many posed action players and many famous moments in the game of baseball during that period.
One of the successful moments of the opening was the selling of the painting of Jackie Robinson to a collector, a friend of mine, Roland Betts, whose gallery in Santa Fe was also a venue for a show I had in 1995. Moments like that are nice.
I walked into this restaurant and there was this beautiful painting of Ebbets Field. And it just evoked so many memories for me because my father was an incredible Dodger fan, so I was an incredible Dodger fan. In the 1955 World Series, my father took me out of school for all 7 games. I went to all 7 games in Brooklyn and in Yankee Stadium and then back to Ebbets Field. And so I walk in and here's this incredible painting, and I started talking to the owner of the restaurant. I offered to buy it right then and there. And he wouldn't hear anything of it, but he did give me Andy's name. And so a few weeks later I called him, and I went down and I met him and I started spending time with him. He's a terrific artist, which anybody can tell, but he paints historical moments. He doesn't sort of make stuff up and decide this player would look good with this player or this team or whatever. Right down to the weather. He paints a particular moment in a particular game or in the history of baseball. That's what I loved. He's really an historian, and the whole project that he's undertaking now is consistent with that view. So anyway, once I started that conversation with him, I told him what I wanted and everything. I think he was sort of touched by all of this. But he also told me it would be probably as much as 2 years, 1.5 to 2 years before he could get to it and do what I wanted. And I wanted something a little bit different. He likes to paint the whole stadium. I wanted it a little tighter. And anyway, I finally got what I wanted, which was a particular moment, a particular game in the '55 World Series, and it's hanging in our house in New York. Yeah, I have a gallery in Santa Fe. What I've tried to do out there, most of the galleries in Santa Fe focused on Southwest artists and sort of the feel of culture and everything. What I've tried to do is to bring in artists from other parts of the world, a number from New York. And Andy, I thought, would be so different that we had a show for him. It was very, very well received. We had some pieces from the upcoming collection that he's doing. So we had some of the individual headshots, and we also had the action shots similar to the one behind us, and the stadium shots, which are the ones that he's famous for. And the first time I went down to Andy's studio, I was sort of amazed at how small and cluttered it was, and how he started to tell me the scale of the project that he was undertaking, and I was astounded by how ambitious that project was. I almost didn't believe it. There were, I don't even know the numbers, but 700 paintings or more than 700 paintings. I just didn't see how one person could do that. But he seemed to have it, despite the clutter, he seemed to have it totally organized. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew what the images were going to be in his mind. Yeah, Andy's a purist, and he believes that the heyday of baseball was this period, which was 46 to 60 or 61. And then after that, it's sort of been adulterated by too many teams and the talent pool being watered down. So he knows everybody from that era, knows their contributions, and that's sort of where he's stuck, and that's the story he wanted to tell, and that's what he's done. Yeah, the Jackie Robinson was in the show. Being a Dodger fan and you're always a Jackie Robinson fan. So, and watching Jackie Robinson steal home, which I did see once in person, was one of the most exciting things I've ever seen. And so that painting just grabbed me. Of course, I've talked to Andy, and he's told me exactly who the umpire is, who is playing, who's the catcher, I think that's the Cubs, what inning, what date, and so on, all of which I have written down, but none of which I've committed to memory. I think the thing that makes Andy's paintings special for me are two things. One is the historical content. I love the fact that Andy, he only paints pure moments. He paints the people, the players, the umpire exactly where they were as that moment happened. He has a great reverence for history. He doesn't want to adulterate it. And secondly, I like his style. It's not too heavy. It's a little light. He's great use of color. It's ambitious because he paints the full stadiums and full crowds. And the big paintings he paints of the stadiums do take him months and months and months to paint. I think it captures the feeling of what it means to go out and enjoy the national pastime and go to sit in the sun and watch a game and get caught up in it. So Chelsea Piers is my latest adventure here. Chelsea Piers is about almost 2 million square feet of sports and entertainment complex. It has skating rinks, roller rinks, indoor soccer fields, basketball courts, rock walls, restaurants, sound stages, marinas. And it started off very modestly. It was an effort I made to find a place for my daughter, a better place for my daughter to figure skate. And it just got out of hand. I tried to rent 100,000 square feet from the state, which owns the piers, and they wouldn't do it, and eventually went to public auction, and we had to come up with other uses to fill it's actually a total of 1.7 million square feet. And we did, it with much trepidation and a lot of anxious moments, but I can tell you now, we've now been open about 15, 18 months. We will draw 3 million people here this year and probably substantially more next year. So it is, I think, made a huge difference to many, many people in New York as to how they live. So we're proud of it.
It's hard to assess whether or not I would begin a project like this again. Knowing what I know now, it's a hard question to answer. There may be moments when I feel like I wouldn't want to do it at all. You know, on any given day, any given hour, I feel differently about it. I mean, discouragement, frustration, weariness, they all take a toll. The idea of starting it again, having just gone through it, does not appeal to me.
He knows that he bit off a little bit more than he could chew. And I think if he had known 10 years ago what he knows now, he would have kind of edited a little bit. But at this point, he's already so deeply into it that what can he really do? He's got a deadline. He's going to drive himself crazy and drop at the painting at the wall. But, you know, he's got to do it. And he has this vision that he wants to see completed.
I don't think that economically it will be a great payoff as a book. I think this project is more a validation of 7 or 8 years worth of work and the stepping stone towards something else. Of course, only so many stepping stones you want to take. I want it to be a tangible object at this point, because even though the work is done as far as paintings go, the organization of it, the book itself is an actual art form which has a life and order of its own. So that will form closure of the whole deal.
Yogi, you are a mess.
We're actually getting dangerously close to seeing this work published. At least that's what I'm feeling at the moment. You know, anything can change. Hopefully it won't. But and anything that goes on for a long time, you always think to yourself, well, will this actually happen or not? So that thought still occurs to me even in my sleep.
I sure hope Andrew's getting close to the end of this, because if he isn't getting close to the end of this, I'm going to go off to Europe without him. I think he's getting close to the end of this project.
I began this project in the fall of 1991. It's now the fall of 1998. The artwork will be complete in the next 6 months. Hopefully sooner, but being realistic, it'll be taken to a level where everything looks like it can be reproduced in a book. It should be available as a finished book in the fall of 1999, which takes us pretty darn close to the year 2000 and all that implies. This is the entrance to Cedar Street, 125. World Trade Center used to be right there. Now we're walking the last turn of the stairs. Walking by our bookshelves. Talk about dust jackets. These are some paintings that were on the wall. Still there, grimy. I've cleaned a few things up. Well, this is the living room. Pat's couch, the television set, my couch. Our television set, I wonder if it'll work again. Here's Pat's knitting studio, where she also designed jewelry. All those are different colors, but now they're all gray. This was my office space. It's one of 17 missing windows. This is my filing system right here. Actually, the flat files contain some negatives and artwork. This was a beautiful kitchen. Let me just look through here. These are our black and white dishes. Now they're pretty solid gray, along with this new cabinet. This is one of my paintings. One of the first paintings I did when I moved in here. Painting on the wall there is actually Jane Mansfield. She got blown down. That's what's left of Jane Mansfield. That's what's left of the 110 to 110 towers. That's about it. This is my painting studio of 24 years. Used to do a lot of paintings here. Hopefully we will again. Sorry, but I'm tripping all over this goddamn stuff. Here's my rogues gallery of some of my favorite girls. Naomi Campbell, Carrie Hatcher, and Jerry Ryan, and a little Christy Turlington. And there's a little picture of Mickey Mantle from one of my paintings. So, if you want to, I guess this is the phone. Yeah, I'll hang it on. Oh, there's Cleveland Municipal Stadium. It's one of 24 paintings I did of aerial views for this book I'm working on. It's an old painting of my favorite ball player, a guy named Dellin. This is the Phillies.